Hello, everyone. Welcome to our exciting session on HR trends for 2025. My name is Kristen, and I'm going to be your guide on this journey, along with a number of other guides. We are going to look at the ever-evolving world of human resources. And trust me, by the end of this session, you are going to be as hyped up as a kid who has just opened their Christmas stocking and eaten all of the candy before breakfast. So today we're going to dive into the top trends that we think are going to shape HR in 2025. And we will take you on a wide-ranging journey from AI and automation to employee well-being to pay transparency. We have got it all covered. And what we really are going to be relying on is your comments and questions to drive a lot of this conversation. We have our experts who are going to join us, but they really are going to be guided by the things that you are most curious about. But first of all, I think we need to give ourselves a big round of applause for making it through 2024. It was a year that was full of challenges. So here's to us, right? We had innovations, we had return to office mandates, but here are some of the biggest hits. So Perceptyx has made headlines with its acquisition of several AI-driven HR tech companies aiming to enhance employee engagement. Disney agreed to pay $43.25 million in settlement over allegations of pay gap, where female employees earned significantly less than their male counterparts. We're going to be talking about pay as part of our conversation this morning. Interestingly enough, we watched Walmart, Ford, Harley-Davidson, John Deere, Lowe's, and a number of other organizations step back from DEI initiatives due to external pressures, not to mention big changes at SHRM's body of knowledge around that particular topic. We continue to see layoffs in technology companies such as Google and Microsoft and Meta and all of those, and so we want to focus on the positive. We're going to spend the next couple hours talking about what is good and exciting that is happening in HR. We are thrilled with a star lineup, and we are going to kick things off by covering a number of different topics. And we are going to start this morning with this conversation around fractional HR. And we are going to talk about that with one of our tried and true experts. We're going to talk about skill base and talent and evolving succession planning. We are going to talk about manager development. We are going to talk about AI and that pay transparency piece. We're going to talk about connectedness. We're going to talk about mergers and acquisitions. And we're going to talk about HR in the C-suite and how that is changing. So grab your coffee, grab your tea or your eggnog, whatever is going to fuel your productivity, and let's get started. This is an interactive session, so the more the merrier in terms of questions and comments. We're here to learn from each other. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Marnie. Marnie?
Hello, that was awesome, Kristen. I'm really excited, and I am beyond honored to be one of the guest moderators today with Progressive HR. I'm Marnie Robbins, founder of Vibe People Studio, where we help companies with all things people experience that vibes with your culture, your vision, mission, values, purpose, and the culture that you ultimately strive to create. I get the absolute honor of interviewing Tracy. And Tracy, I know you're awfully busy, but you are all over LinkedIn, whether it's fractional work, talking about a skills gap, you name it. There's just such leadership insights that you bring to the table, and you have a great following. So I'm absolutely honored to be introducing you to the live today.
Hi, thanks, Marnie. I'm happy to be here. I'm Tracy Spanenberg. I used to be the Chief People Officer of a company called the Granite Group, and now I'm a consultant and speaker and tech advisor and all kinds of other things. And apparently I neglected to check my background, professional gift wrapper this time of year, as you can see a giant box of stuff sitting in my background. So I'm thrilled to be here. This is always really fun.
Awesome. Well, it adds to the festive nature of today. So that I
Yeah.
think that's everyone's office in the background. And so we all have wrapping paper and,
Yeah.
and random stuff. So that being said, you had mentioned fractional, work. And so as fractional HR, I mean, we've seen it become very common, in the space. How do you see this model evolving in 2025?
So first of all, I want to say hi to Deb. I saw the note, and Sam and some other friends that are here. It's great. Farah. I saw a lot of familiar names. So hello, everybody. So I didn't know what fractional was until 2 years ago, and I think it was Anessa Fike who's really, I think, one of the earliest people doing this. I learned, she was my coach. I learned about it from her, and I think people are just starting to hear about it. I think a lot of people still don't know what it is, but it's essentially, you're working on your own for a company that gets a fraction of your time. And it's not exclusively HR. My husband was essentially a fractional CFO for many years, and he just didn't call it that, right? And so what I'm doing now is a little bit different. It's more advising, but I was doing fractional. I will likely be doing fractional in the future. But I think the bottom line is, as they say in Fractional People, which is a wonderful group that I'm a part of, it's all good. It's all part. You may choose what you want to do when you go out on your own. It may be chosen for you, and then you may change, like I did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had a conversation with the founder of an HR tech company, and he was saying, agency is a really big thing of people taking agency not only in their roles, but you see that a lot in the fractional line of work is people, particularly in the people business, saying, you know what, I'm going to take agency over what I do and be able to own that. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
100%. 100%. So that's why we do what we do, right? That's why we're doing this.
Exactly. Awesome. And so you deal a lot or have a lot of experience in kind of that blue collar, area of the business. So there's a lot of discussions and changes, particularly in regard to the political climate, et cetera, that are affecting this, more skilled workforce. So what should HR, industries like agriculture, manufacturing, and frontline roles really be thinking and preparing for going into 2025?
I think the same things as everybody else. I think we tend to not give enough emphasis on companies with deskless workforces and with frontline companies. We don't tend to talk about that. So we tend to focus on, at least in the world that I live on, right? But we tend to overgeneralize. And then again, I'm overgeneralizing, right? But I think, what I'd like to do going into 2025, people are people, no matter whether you're working in a distribution center, whether you're coding, whether you're an executive, whether you're working in the lunchroom of a school, people are people, and everybody deserves an incredible employee experience. So what I'm super focused on with my clients and with a lot of my speaking, with a lot of work that I do, is making sure that a light is shown on these incredible workplaces and these incredible leaders doing work that doesn't always get highlighted. I mean, my last company sold toilets and plumbing supplies, and the fact that I was on stages with people in named companies was frankly strange, right? But I had an interesting story, and there's so many interesting stories out there, and it's not the exclusive domain of companies that you may have heard of.
Oh, I love that. And especially, as Kristen put, the deskless, workforce is awesome. I think, making that happen. Right. But it is, a lot of my experiences in the tech industry, and that can be more glamorous and whatnot. But the fact is workforce culture and workforce environment are important no matter where and what you're doing. And so I love that you're bringing a voice to that area of the business. I'm curious, with Corrine and Kristen, if you've seen, more of a voice or an example that comes to light for you.
So you'll have to repeat that question, Marnie, because I'm working the background controls. And so I was kind of making sure that everything was in place and getting ready for the changeover. Could you repeat that for me, please?
Oh, yeah. No, we were just talking about, bringing more of a light to the blue collar type workforce, to companies that are more, doing things that aren't necessarily at a desk, and just that they have a priority as well. And I'm just wondering if there's been any trends that y'all have seen as well.
Yeah, in regards to, I don't know if a lot of people know. Well, first of all, I'm Corinne Woodman Hollebeck, and I'm the founder of Progressive HR. And before I went into HR, I was a blue collar worker. I mean, is it even, should we say
No.
blue collar, white collar?
No.
We're all in the workforce together. And I think with and I'm sorry if I'm offending somebody here, but I don't think that university degrees are really the pathway to skills anymore. And with kind of that transition in the workforce, I mean, we're all knowledge workers. We're all skilled workers. And so I don't really like the terms blue collar and white collar.
I don't use it. Yeah. No, me neither.
Yeah. We're all humans that have a potential to be, giving into the workforce and creating a wonderful workplace for everyone. So maybe that doesn't exactly, okay, I'll go back. That's some of the trend I'm seeing. I'm seeing the disappearance of this idea of blue collar and white collar, and just the saying workforce, or we're all knowledge workers. So I see Tracy nodding her head. Kristen?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would have to say that this is one of those shifts in the corporate world, in mainly in larger organizations, that's going to probably be like the Titanic, right? When we think about how we can turn away from job requirements that are standardized college degrees, standardized number of years of experience in this much of a niche, instead of looking at people, how can they learn? Are they anxious to be curious? Can they figure things out on their own? And you look at that skill set versus that label or that specific piece of data or experience. Getting our leaders there sometimes is a little bit of a shift as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's 100%. It's definitely a shift. And I think we're seeing a lot of younger people more interested in things like the trades, and more interested in, I'm going to do my own thing and, be a creator, but also I need health insurance and I want to do something. And a lot more of a movement toward more physical work, or where you're not stuck behind a desk all day. And so I think the challenge for companies like my past company and my clients' companies, which are largely in distribution, is how do we meet the needs of those talented people coming into the workforce who want to work, but who don't want to work 7 to 4 or whatever the shift is, who need, hours that are a little bit more creative. So I think it's a huge shift, and this gets into what Corinne and I, you and I have talked about this, the nature of work itself changing, and how we're not quite ready for that. And that's probably going to be a 2026 conversation.
And to your point, Tracy, what was it? Not even just 4 years ago, specific countries, especially in Europe, had like 500 different shift schedules, because they were trying to open it up and to the new way of work, to really, making sure that the talent that they were trying to attract wanted to be there. And that's a lot of shifts, 500 separate different shifts.
Yeah. There's an app for that now. There's a few apps for that now.
There is
a lot
a few apps.
So that makes it a lot easier right now. But yeah, I'm excited to see that change going forward.
Awesome. Well, Tracy, we know you have to jump. Being a very busy person, you are. So thank you again for joining. You've instigated some really good comments in the chat, and we can't wait to dig into them. But I know you have to go, so thank you so much.
I'm going to pick up my dad, so we'll see you all. Bye.
Thanks for joining us, Tracy. Bye. Bye. All right, everyone. This is one of my favorite times of our lives. We're going to go to you, the audience, and have you introduce yourselves. I know many people have already joined in the comments and let us know who they are, where they're streaming from, and what their trends are for 2025. So I'm going to the audience now. So we've got, this is Deb Horowitz from Orlando, Florida. Hi, Deb. Karen Cass from Houston, Texas. Thanks for joining us, Karen. Paula from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Hola, Paula. We have Don Martin from San Diego, California. More California. Emma Strong from Oakland. And we have Farah from Chicago. Thank you for joining us. And of course, we have more people from Texas. Buck from Austin. And my very good friend Deb, howdy from Minneapolis. Hi, Deb. We have Sean coming in from Virginia. And this is interesting. We have Virginia from Albuquerque. And Roseman says, greeting from Toronto, Canada. Look forward to spending an enlightening session with the panel. Thank you so much, Roseman. And we're headed to the UK with Sam Eaton. Hello, Sam. Thank you for joining us. We have Dominique coming from Michigan in the Midwest. And Lori from Wisconsin. All right, all my Scotties out there. Deb says, I'm one of Tracy's devout fans. Thank you, Deb. So many more people here. I hope I can get through everybody in our time. Oh my gosh, I am not going to pronounce his name correctly, but I'm going to try. Makiin from Charleston, South Carolina. And Kyle Akert. Hi, Kyle from Madison. Nice to see you. We've got some great conversations already happening in the comments. And we have Melissa from joining us from California. A lot of people saying that they love the deskless workforce. Let's see here, lots of conversation. Let's see if I can have any more introductions. We have Sasha coming in from Vermont. And we have Kimberly from Virginia. And I think I'm only going to be able to do a few more, Abu. But everyone who has had comments come in. Armita from Kentucky, hello. We'll be flashing those on the screen. So if you have any questions or comments as we're going through the conversation and the flow of the discussion, please go ahead and add those to the comments, and we'll go ahead and answer those questions and get to those comments, and some of the comments I'll flash on the screen as we go through our conversation. So this is an open forum, and you guys have the reins. Go ahead, comment, ask questions, and we are going to go quickly to our next guest, Debbie.
Hello, Debbie. It's good to see you. Good to see you. So we are bouncing around from topic to topic because there are so many different things that we want to cover. And I'm excited, based on your background, to have you part of this conversation. The organizational effectiveness work, the HR work, the coaching and the leadership development work. And I'm really curious about how you see those things interacting and playing out for us in 2025.
Yep. So first of all, it's exciting to be here. Although, Kristen, I was a little nervous of having to navigate you and your elves again, like we did last year. So now you're home.
You never know. You never know.
You never know. And in honor of Tracy Spanenberg, who is a big coffee fan, I have my coffee this morning. So at least I got to be on the screen with her for a little bit. I do want to briefly comment on just where you all were going, just as a former chief talent officer, and talking about this, this transition from degrees and thinking about requirements to optional or what's requested, and thinking about skills. And I will say, absolutely, I'm seeing that. And I think it's going to be a fascinating and long-term transition, and we're going to go back and forth, and it's going to be one of these things, and it's going to be, how do we ultimately thread the needle, and what's the right degree of flexibility? What's interesting is, I say I have a degree in medieval history. You might say, how the heck did that prepare me for a workforce? I also have a master's in medieval history. And I would say, in some ways, it helped me learn to think and to strategize and to pull together information from disparate and incomplete pieces. And so that's what we're looking for, critical thinking skills. So if anything, I go like, hey, as a former humanities degree person, there is a role in that. And it's how do we help people with critical thinking? I also don't think that you have to get that just from a university and a college. So I think it's how do we meet the workforce where they're at and saying skills are so critical, and how are we starting to really manage and leverage a workforce by skills? And we can't forget the critical thinking, the empathy, the other skills that are going to help us deal with this whole transformation that we're in. So I think that's the question, right? There's hard skills, there's soft skills, or how do we prepare our workforce no matter where they're entering, where they're coming from? And I think, wow, what a great place for HR to be at the helm of navigating that conversation. So former chief talent officer couldn't just let that conversation go by without weighing in. So going to your question, Kristen, about, so from an OE org design perspective, where do I see 2025 happening? Right. When we think about AI, which clearly everybody's thinking about AI, and we think about the disruption that it's causing in our organizations, I want to get down to what happens in jobs, what happens in teams, what happens in functions and departments, and how are we in HR, or how are HR organizations, whether they're in-house or external, like a lot of us are these days, in fractional type roles, helping the organization understand what's at its core, how do we navigate this disruption, and how do we consider what work needs to stay in-house, what can be optimized by technology. There's always this list of things that teams wanted to get to, that needed to get to, that would add greater customer value, that would reduce complexity. My biggest hope, and I think where it's ultimately going to land, is AI is going to free up capacity to allow organizations and teams to go after greater value added work. That's ultimately what's going to happen. I think in the short term, are we going to see disruption where people are going to unfortunately lose jobs because of AI? Yes. But I also know that people are going to be gaining jobs because of AI, right? So we haven't seen the 2024 report, but 2023 Bureau of Labor report talked about how 13 million people in the US may lose their jobs due to AI, but 18 million are going to gain. So ultimately, I do believe, and the data would suggest there's a net gain. So how do we in these functions from an OD, OE perspective help leaders get clear about what work is critical, how and where might we use technology to get rid of or to take care of some lower value add work, and keep the workforce and retrain the workforce on those pieces that really matter. Pieces that matter for complexity, pieces that matter for compliance, pieces that matter for customer value. So I'm excited about that shift. And I do think what that means is, so for those of us that grew up in the OD OE world, like I did, I'm talking to my colleagues who grew up in the generalist world and saying, these are skill sets you're going to need to learn pretty quickly. And the good news is I think there's a lot of focus on that. So HR, I think, is in the right place for asking those tough questions and then coming together with people that know the business, with people that know these skill sets, and being able to work together to help your clients. So that's where I see 2025 and 2026 and beyond. I think if you are in the OD, OE space, it is a great time to be there. And if you've had interest in the OE, OD space, it's a great time to get there, because we're in this middle of transformation. And that's when these skill sets, I think, are so important.
So in thinking about what you are explaining around AI and HR being able to leverage some of that, especially in the business partner or the practitioner space, what are the recommendations you have around upskilling ourselves? How do we go about doing that?
I love that question, Kristen, because I like to say, can we drink our own champagne? We're always taking care of the rest of the organization. And who's taking care of HR? So can I just say, put on your oxygen masks, people. Let's take care of ourselves first. And I think that there's two places. So one, we have to be conversant in AI. Absolutely have to be conversant. It doesn't mean we have to be deep experts, but let's start with our own place and let's make sure that we're experimenting, we're testing and learning, we're looking at our business processes, we're looking at our day-to-day work and saying, what can I outsource to AI? Where can I have a task, a process, a meeting, something that I can do and test and learn how I can use AI more effectively and efficiently. So that's one. Two, I think from the ODOE perspective, there's three things that sort of come to mind. One, there's always change management involved. So how comfortable are you at understanding change, at more agile approaches to change, design thinking around change? So if you're familiar with the words design thinking, awesome. If you're not yet familiar with the words design thinking, I actually say go to ChatGPT and start looking up and play around with what is design thinking. And the reason I share that is I think it's a great way to empower and really get at the heart of the employee experience and get at the heart of whoever your clients are, internal or external, and understand and help work them through that. So I think change management, I think design thinking, and then really getting into org design. So there are some great resources out there. I will tell you, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the STAR model, which is probably Jay Galbraith. He's the late and great Galbraith is considered in some ways the grandfather of org design. He has a really simple model, the STAR model. You could Google it, you can ChatGPT it, and start playing around with it. I think talk to your ODOE friends. There are online courses. If you're someone who loves formal learning, there's lots of certificates out there. Hacking HR has a certificate program that I'm actually, I think, going to be on the faculty of starting next year. So there's lots of different ways, but make sure you feel more conversant with change management. Make sure that you're starting to be introduced to design thinking, and then really start to play with org design and start small and just build experience there. So that's some thoughts. I don't know. I'd love to hear thoughts from others. I mean, there's lots of wisdom on the panel and lots of wisdom in comments.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk around this particular topic around, really having the capacity to use AI if we can alleviate fear, right? So how do we talk about it in ways that aren't scary for people? Being able to incorporate artificial intelligence in our work and make things much more efficient, right? How do we drive down, to your point, the non-value added work so that we can increase what we probably all consider in the HR world to be the fun stuff, which is the OD, the OE, the coaching piece, right? Sasha is using ChatGPT regularly as a starting point for drafts, templates, idea generation. Sounds like she's really into it. And they can be wrong, right? So AI even usually comes with a little disclaimer now that says you're kind of responsible for fact checking. But I think there's really an opportunity to use it as a starting point. Deb is really looking at that virtual design thinking and impacting teams' effectiveness. Sounds like she's volunteering for some connections and some coffee hours here. So you might want to reach out to Deb. And then, getting some time back in our day, really to be able to focus and maybe giving us the opportunity to put our oxygen masks on. So I love that approach and the practicality of it. And design thinking is something that isn't necessarily just applicable to this space in the HR realm. It is all over the place. I think there's a great opportunity for us to maybe have some learning about that. And this group maybe can talk a year from now about how much learning of design thinking and AI we did. So
can I put a plug in? So yes, I think your point, Kristen, about, design thinking actually came out in the product space, right? So it is absolutely critical and you can use it in any part of the business. I think it's a good skill set. Again, if HR is really facilitating some of these critical conversations, it's a great way to sort of facilitate the process. Nicole Desane is one of the greats in terms of design thinking for HR. So Talent Imperative is her organization. You can find her on LinkedIn. She's got a newsletter. She's writing a book. So definitely want to give props to her. She sometimes runs hackathons. So if you just want to test and learn, again, there's lots of places to go. So I'm sure we'll find more in the chat. And then afterwards, Corinne, I'm sure people will continue to add resources on design thinking, ODOE. But I'm just excited for where I think the work is coming. And as Kristen said, it's the fun stuff and it's the strategic stuff. And that's where HR is continuing to add value.
I love it. Thank you so much. And we are going to shift our focus to Corrine and Megan and hand off and move to a brand new topic even.
Hi, everybody. So it's my pleasure to introduce Megan Bickle, talent management strategist and consultant. We're going to be talking about the trends of skills-based talent and also some evolution in succession planning. So I bring to the stage Megan Bickle. There you are.
Here I am.
And that didn't work again. It's StreamYard. Come on, work with me. Okay. Let's try this. There we go. We made it work. We made it work. So Megan, we had this conversation a week ago, actually, when we were together in person about how companies are looking at skills different, especially looking at talent practices. In moving from this idea of what we've been talking about, looking at when someone comes to the table, the experience, and really looking at the skills that they need to plug into the organization. So could you tell us a little bit more about what is the difference between skills-based talent and upskilling?
Yeah, fabulous place to start. And to caveat, like talking about skills in the workplace, none of this is new. We're just seeing a huge rise in organizations really looking at skills as one pillar of how to rethink and redesign talent strategies, HR strategies, talent management strategies. So looking at skills really in terms of what skills do we have in our organization? Like, how do we break apart jobs and work into smaller puzzle pieces versus upskilling being recognizing, whoa, there's some critical skills that we have a gap and we need to have a concerted effort around increasing our employees' capabilities in those specific areas.
Thanks, Megan. And moving to succession planning and kind of adding that in, how is succession planning evolving because of that?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating how historically succession planning has been this arduous, long-term initiative. So take, anybody in the executive suite, where looking at who are our future CEOs, our future VPs? How do we stretch them? And looking at it from a multi-year process, the landscape has changed. And, looking at average tenures, it's not quite the norm where somebody joins an organization and spends 10, 15, 20, 30 years there. And so that's really put succession planning into needing to dramatically shift in terms of, okay, how are we looking at skill profiles? What experiences, what learning agility do we need to have versus we need somebody to have done all these things and have spent, 10 plus years at the organization in order to even consider them for an executive role, and just the transferability of skills and really, again, like looking at profiles differently than I think companies have historically looked at in the past. I think General Electric is actually a really great case study around succession planning. GE was renowned for, HR practices. And a few years ago, Jeff Immelt left the company back in 2017 after being CEO for decades. John Flannery was made CEO. He was a lifelong GE employee, and General Electric had spent about 5+ years grooming potential successors and providing them with cross-functional, cross-regional opportunities, media exposure. John Flannery lasted a year. And then a new CEO was brought in externally. And I bring this up in terms of, what went wrong? Was it, the organization had dramatically changed, external influences? And so almost like using that as a case study of, classically GE did everything right, yet it got so many things wrong. And unfortunately, John Flannery wasn't able to be successful. And so again, like really for organizations to kind of rethink, how have we been doing our succession planning? What does it look like? How do we be more thoughtful and intentional around skills, as well as just recognizing the landscape has shifted?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Thank you, Megan. Opening up to the group here, and we had a few more of our panel join us, Gita Kulkarni, Troy Vermillion, and Susan Fiero. And I do see also Alex Kuchev in the background. Alex, you're welcome to join us at any time. So opening it up to the panel here, talking about skills-based talent and succession planning, do you have anything to add to what Megan said?
I think classically, the technology industry has focused more on skills than specific pillars that they're looking for within, education and things like that, because the speed of technology has evolved quicker than education or traditional education could keep up with. What we're seeing now with the application of AI in every industry is that speed of change. And so the fact that we're focusing on skills-based hiring, it's probably a little bit long overdue. I'm excited about it because I think a lot of people have the credentials, but they may not have the skills. A lot of people have the skills, but maybe they don't have the credentialing that you would be looking for. And I think the fact that we're talking about this is very timely. And so GE is a perfect example. They've got their fingers in a lot of different industry around technology. A lot of it is industrial in its nature. But even them, as large of a company as they are, struggled probably to look at the skills necessary to take you into the next generation, right? With 5, maybe soon to be 6 generations in the workforce all working together, right? So I think, first of all, I admire all of you HR people, and talent experts on the fact that you're tackling this, because it is a huge challenge for industries. I talk to CPOs and CHROs every single day, and most of them they're just not ready to take it on because they don't feel like enough people are talking about it. So I'm excited about this conversation because y'all are just, blowing my mind with some of the things you're talking about.
Now, Troy, don't you include yourself in that?
Well, I'm more of a technologist than I am probably HR, but it's always been with a specific focus on HR and so forth. So yes, I appreciate that. I'll take that from you. That's
Thanks, Troy.
Thanks.
So we've got a few minutes to quickly go to the audience and see if there is some questions. There's some questions that we had before, but I wanted to jump in here with Deb's question. What are the strategy folks who will help us define the roles that will be created because of AI? Where are the strategy folks who will help us define the roles that will be created because of AI? Group, where do you think they are? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can go again.
Just start talking.
Okay. I'll just give my thought process on it. So much of HR for many, many years was very administrative. Not that people wanted to spend their time there, but the beauty of what is happening with artificial intelligence, machine learning, any sort of workflow strategy is that a lot of those menial tasks, which prevent you from being employee facing, can now be automated to a point, right? You always need people on the front end and the back end of that automation giving good input and making sure that the output is giving you good outcomes. And so that's the beauty of it. All the tactical things can now, believe it or not, can be automated. And I know you were talking about ChatGPT and some of the people really being excited about that. The problem with that sometimes is that the information is, again, input is not always accurate. And so there are systems out there like Perplexity AI can give you a better input. Claude is another AI platform that can give you better copywriting within that. So if you have good inputs and then you can set them through a series of things, you could create better employee communication, as an example, right? Just by having a series of workflows that work together to give you a great net result. And I see that in a lot of the HRIS systems that they're starting to improve some of the AI connectivity to those sorts of systems so you can streamline processes. But again, I don't think it's just the large language models that are going to be most beneficial. I think it's going to be more of the machine learning that gets predictive about the things that you're doing every single day and then make suggestions on ways that you can streamline those processes. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Hands up, razor up. Love that. I also love Deb's comment that says, Troy, you're human, so you belong. You belong in HR. I would have to agree with Deb on that. All right. With that, it's time to turn it over to Kristen.
Well, and I think this is a great transition to our conversation with Susan. And we've got some really good topics on this one because we're talking about succession planning, Susan. We're talking about AI, and we want to talk a little bit about Gen Z, right? So Troy mentioned the 5, goodness, maybe 6 generations in the workforce, and I'm not sure all of us HR people can handle it, especially older people. I'm just going to speak for myself. But I'm curious, when you think about all of the things that are happening in the HR space and the business and organization space, how does this conversation apply to Gen Z?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Wonderful to be here with you all. Esteemed folks working on these really tough things in the people space. I think that this is like, when I looked at the topics that folks were talking about, I thought this is the perfect segue. We have a pool of talent that we need to tap into and harness and really unlock in order to help these things be successful. So for me, I think that like this is, you know, a trend and something that we need to harness and look forward to is the talent in Gen Z. You know, it's the first kind of like digitally native generation, and the experiences that they have, we can learn from, but also they're looking to us to say, where do I want to put this talent? And what they're looking for are companies that are authentic. They're looking for companies that have a point of view that they can relate to. Brands like Patagonia, who have been really successful in attracting, you know, Gen Z talent because they're very clear about what they're doing. They're championing sustainability and they have, you know, corporate social responsibility. So, you know, we have to think about how are we going to attract this talent, and then how are we going to attain that, you know, retain that talent. And a lot of that comes with just, you know, the policies that we have that these folks are looking for, right? In their world, they're looking for, you know, how can they do things more effectively, efficiently because of technology. So they can be the people who we partner with on what the programs are for AI and what these roles look like. They should be people who we look to instead of going, oh my gosh, no, the Gen Z, they're emotional, or they have these expectations, or they're entitled. That's not always the case, right? They know what they want because they have had access to things so readily for their entire life. And I think we can turn that into a positive by they're holding us accountable. I mean, that's how I feel in terms of, you know, like what we sell with employer branding, you know, with our talent management and our talent acquisition. When they come in, they're like, well, is this the bill of goods that I bought, right? You know, how are you really living up to this, you know, whatever PR stuff you have, you know, on your, you know, career page or other things that you're spending time on. And I think that's really great. You know, they want transparency. They're passionate about social impact. They want to make, you know, they want to have a meaningful work experience. And I think all of those things challenge us in really good ways, but we can harness that by partnering with, you know, that generation of talent to help, you know, maybe in certain ways that, you know, there's things that we don't know, right? Like if we are hiring for the future. And I just think that there's a secret to unlocking this next generation of talent, and they can help us to be more authentic, even in a digital world, even in AI driven spaces. They're actually seeking and looking for authenticity and human connection.
Well, and I think we've got a great segue question here in the comments from Christina, and she's asking, what are some examples of HR policies and programs that you think are the most important to Gen Z that may look different than other generations? And what are some of the policies that are important that overlap with the generations, right? So
yeah,
you know, you talked about that corporate social responsibility and sustainability, but what else should we really be looking at? Is our 5-year succession planning strategy really going to help these folks, or what should we be evaluating?
Yeah. One of the things that to the latter half of the question is like that they're overlapping in generations. I think a lot about, there's so much discussion around like hybrid work and remote work. And, you know, even before COVID, we were doing, you know, remote work, we were doing hybrid work. It just didn't have all the buzziness that it does now and has had in the last few years. But I think something that remains true for every person and every generation in the workforce is they want to be treated like an adult and like a human that has needs that may span, regardless of whether they're caregivers or parents or any of those things. They just want to have common sense practices around how work gets done. And I think a lot of that has to do with where work gets done. So I think that whether you're a parent, whether you're a caregiver, you're sandwiched in that, you know, caregiving and maybe being a parent, or you're not. And you just want to know like, hey, I can do my best work, you know, at a certain time of day, at a certain location. And those are the types of policies that I think we need to be thinking about in a common sense way. And I know that we're challenged with maybe what our senior leadership or other executives want to do in terms of return to office. But I really think that what it comes down to is being thoughtful about just the human experience and having policies that speak to flexibility. I think flexibility is important regardless of the generation that you're in, and really creating an environment where people can deliver on their work product irrespective of the location or time that gets done. And I think there's a lot of that we can actually leverage in our field that we oftentimes think of being, you know, challenged with that because of location or because of, you know, generation as well.
So I'd love to open it up to our panel here and hear about input on, you know, your experiences with the different generations, maybe not even focusing on Gen Z, but what are some of the things that you have seen or experienced in that work?
Yeah, I love what Susan is saying. Like speaking my language, you know, everything as far as even just the pragmatic approach to what we're offering and the flexibility that we're offering. I see a lot of entrepreneurship and mentality, or entrepreneurship and mentality coming from, you know, these younger generations coming up. But, you know, even as companies go more hybrid, remote, you know, in more flexible in the way that they approach benefits and policies and offerings, I think getting really malleable and agile and flexible in not only what we're providing from a benefit standpoint. So you see a lot of things coming up of like, you know, choose your own adventure, you know, with stipends and whatnot, but also how do we approach work in general? How do you want to work with us? How do you want to interact with the company? And instead of saying, hey, we have this overarching way of doing business or overarching culture, we're going to have to be a little more versatile and letting people choose their own path within our organization and what that means for them. So I just love it. I think it's going to be an exciting time of exploration and experimentation with our teams and co-creating that experience.
I wanted to pipe in really quickly, and I saw in the private chat that Gita mentioned wisdom transference. So Gita, you want to make a comment about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. I think we're with 6 and growing generations coming into the workforce. There's a fascinating opportunity. I think many of us have seen that movie. I don't know the name of it, but where what's his name? Is it Robert De Niro? I came in and he was in the workforce and he was older, and then there was the younger statesman. And I think what you're seeing, and I think there's a beautiful chemistry that's happening between young and old and everything in between, you know, all these generations, where I do believe that each of these generations have a really unique optic on how they look at work. And when you tie them all together and work together, and you take somebody who's got 10,000 hours of a specialty and couple them with somebody who's got 10,000 hours as being a digital native, you can really create some beautiful solutions, right? And I think that's that wisdom transfer I was talking about.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great. Oh no, I think that's a great piece of that. being able to label it and call it what we think is probably the most valuable, because as we started to talk about skills and that skill development, really talking about those particular things and developing those conversations around the behaviors that Farah is mentioning in a growing trend of, maybe no-shows or lack of commitment. And I think this is an opportunity for us as leaders to help make sure that we have some of those opportunities to transfer and coach and mentor and some of those types of things. And so I think that even takes us into the conversation we're going to have next around kind of headcount planning and actually workforce planning, and how are we planning our workforce and that development of our workforce. Marty?
Yeah, so I am excited to jump in and speak with Karen Weeks, Global Chief People Officer at Obviously. And great segue, Kristen, well done you. One of the things that we talk about a lot is headcount planning, organizational design, you name it. But for 2024, it was a big year of uncertainty. There was a lot going on for many businesses. And how do you predict, Karen, that people strategies will evolve for the coming year to not only balance, agility and growth, not the growth at all costs, but how do we become agile and still grow in a healthy fashion? How do you see that happening?
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. Such a great group. I think that it's so funny. We say 2024 was a year of ups and downs. I think the last 5 years have been a bunch of years of ups and downs. And so I think knowing it's going to continue first is the thing we need to really consider, is that I don't know, I'm sure it's not the same way for every organization, but in general, we should expect more ups and downs. And so I think one thing that I work with a lot of business owners on, and we look at probably because of my startup experiences, is let's look at it holistically based on what we know today, but then what are some things that we can put in as milestones? So, in order to hire that fifth CS person, we need to be at X number of revenue, or in order to know that we need another manager, we're going to be at X team members, because that's when the scope changes and we know we need someone else. So we definitely can look at it holistically as we can today, but then what are those different milestones where we can make some of those decisions? A lot of great product managers will say, here's my yearly product roadmap. I'm 100% confident on Q1, 75% on Q2, 50% on Q3, et cetera, throughout the year. And I think we can take a similar stance around headcount planning and people and culture strategies. Is Q1 is probably pretty locked in. Q2 is pretty close. And then we'll continue to adjust and evolve as we go. And that is hiring from the outside. That's internal planning. That's merit budgets. That's bonuses. It's anything to do with the broader workforce from a budget standpoint and what we can be promising our team. I love that came out already around what our promises to the team members, just like what their promises back to the leaders and the people teams. Where do we stand on some of these things? Do we want to upskill some people, knowing that we might need new managers in the second half of the year, and without any promises about it's going to be you and here's the timeline and all the things? If we've got sort of those high potentials, or as we've looked at a new version of succession planning, if we know that's our next crop of new managers or potential new managers, what can we be doing now to invest in them, both so that the business has new managers ready to tap when we are ready, and people feel the investment in their own development? So I think it's sort of looking at a couple of things of, what do we know today? What do we need to know in order to make those decisions? And what can we be doing to prepare as best as we can for when those moments do come?
Yeah, I love that. It really simplifies the process, right? Like where are we today? What are the major things that we need to accomplish? And how often, from a cadence standpoint, do you think you should be having these conversations with your leadership, or, with your management team?
I think like everything, it really depends on the cadence of your business. In a startup, that might be 6 weeks, every other month, maybe once a quarter, but things change so quickly. In more developed organizations or more mature organizations, maybe that's twice a year. It also might be, well, this is the cadence we expect to do it, but we're ready to jump if something dramatically happens. Like back in 2020, people probably were doing something quarterly, and then all of a sudden we had to figure things out before March 30th, or then April 10th and April 20th. It was much faster. So, you can always put together a plan, say, based on our business cadence, quarterly probably works for us, not enough changes in between, but these are the people that will come together to make some decisions if we need to get off that cadence. And I think that's the biggest piece too, is who's a part of those decisions when it happens. Again, based on your org structure, based on how involved a CEO is, or is it, a head of people and the head of finance, and they're the ones that are making the decisions. But mapping as much of that out ahead of time, so you can be agile and you can jump and change when you need to, and the right people are in the room, but not too many people are in the room if that is a possible option.
Like, absolutely. It's just understanding, if stuff happens over here, who's going to be in the room to make sure that we're moving forward, and we're moving forward quickly. I'm curious, what the rest of the panel feels as far as, it being in kind of a constant state of change. That, as Karen put it, we've been going around this for years, not just this past year, and that doesn't look to slow down. I'm curious to see what this panel thinks as far as, making sure that their organizations feel agile and moving forward.
So one of the things that, I'm a small business owner, and one of the things that I see in my business that I think also directly is reflective of organizations is, the rapidness of the way everything is changing. You can't have something that is perfection. You can't have like this, spend so much time on a framework or a roadmap, because it's going to change so quickly. And so to the point is that you have to be agile. You have to be okay with not having perfection, but like almost as good. And something like you could have, you may have something in your framework, but then you have 3 other things that it may change too, not only being agile, but also being prepared for change.
Yes.
Yeah. And I should say real quick, just because I happen to see a comment, I think it's also really helpful to prepare the team for this as well. So someone asked a question about, how can we help folks understand what that development path looks like and what is some of that timing? And so, when I have done career pathing, I've said things like, you might, a more junior role, you might be enrolled for 1 to 3 years. And it depends on what experience you're bringing into that. And then, in order to develop into a manager, we have a program that you go through that's roughly 6 months, and then there's business need in this. And so you're not saying, oh, it's every year you'll get promoted. It's a band. And this is how we consider those things. And this is what it takes to get into it. And this is what, demonstrating the next role looks like. And some people listen and hear that better than others on our teams, but at least, what can we put in? So what was just being said, there's framework, but there's also agility and flexibility within that framework.
Yes. And that communication, I've had that conversation with Troy, around employee comms, we talk a lot about that, and he's all kind of tying it together. What story are you telling your team, and do they understand, the nuance behind it? So I think that's also important. I think we have a couple minutes left. Any other thoughts from the panel?
I just want to say, speaking a little bit to what Karen was talking about, like, and we think about like product, a product organization and how you create a roadmap. I think similarly, there's a trend, in the HR space to be thinking about people operations as product organizations. And I think, to speak to the last comment, like, this having a minimum viable product, right? Whether it's for a program or a policy or something, like, it needs to be that. And I think if we take that theology into how we create things for our people teams, it really does speak to the ability to have, agile practices and those types of things. Because I have found this in my career, spend a ton of time, creating a program and policy and thinking it's exactly what everybody wants and needs. And you roll it out and it's like crickets, right? So yes, Kristen, back to design thinking. And it's nice to always bring in like tidbits of things, the people that we support and the functions that we're partnering with, taking the best of the things that they do and applying them to our function, because we very rarely get that spotlight, right, to actually bring those expertise, so we can benefit from those around us.
And it also, I think, shows that your people team is open and we are also learning and trying things and it may not work. I think so often we're looked at, oh, well, you're HR, you're supposed to have the answer. And we definitely do not. So it also shows like, we heard your feedback. We're going to try this thing. We're going to see if it works. We'll get some more feedback and we'll try again. So I think it also helps our brand too.
Totally.
Here. So I think design thinking is kind of, a big theme for 2025 is more design thinking. Karen, thank you so much for your insights and jumping on. It was such a pleasure. Corrine, I'm going to toss it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Marnie. Thanks, Karen. So we're at the top of the hour or the bottom of the hour and the top of the hour. And I apologize again, StreamYard is deciding that it's going to make it a little tough on me, but there we go. Okay, so I want to acknowledge two things. First of all is that we have a few other audience members joining us now because it is the start of the next hour. And so I wanted to say welcome to all of you and go ahead and please introduce yourself in the comments and let us know where you're joining from. This is a panel discussion on HR trends for 2025. We've had a great group of experts come on for the first hour, and we get another great group of experts for the second hour. And it's all apparent to me that we're going to have to make this 3 hours next year. So there is just not enough time for all the great group discussion we want to have. And then I also wanted to acknowledge that Megan Bickle had to leave us, and I didn't get to say thank you, but thank you, Megan Bickle. And here we go with Alex. So Alex, hi, how are you?
Hi, great to be here with all this amazing panel. Thank you.
So we're going to be discussing AI and HR, and I think this is a conversation a lot of people want to hear about. And when I think AI and HR, I mean, I just think so many things, but I wanted to get your thoughts. You talk a lot about AI, large language models, and even AGI in your LinkedIn posts. So where do you think this 2025 is going to take us in that realm?
Yeah, I think ultimately we see tendency for the tools to be more mature. I think the year 24 was the year of major breakthrough innovation. And now I will think the year 2025 will bring us a more robust products and platforms. And one particular spotlight we start to hear from different functions is agent. I think this is the buzzword that started to grow sometime mid-year 2024, but now we hear a number of CEOs of big tech companies who talk about agentic frameworks, agents. So what is actually agent? Well, think of it of a copilot plus, eventually a virtual employee that could deliver a certain number of tasks that are currently part of any one, different functions or in a different workloads. And I see for HR a new opportunity because first we will have better sets of tools. I see already a number of agents being proposed in the recruitment space where you could, through natural language, ask a hiring manager to open a requisition, and then this agent will ask you certain sets of questions, right? What kind of person you would like to hire, what kind of responsibilities this role would have, and the hiring manager will provide the answer and then say, oh, why don't you ask Susie from finance, because that person that I want to hire will also work closely with the finance department, and they will also work closely with procurement. And so that agent will basically go and collect information from different, stakeholders that this role is meant to communicate with, and build that job description of what will the ideal candidate profile will look like. Then it will feed back to the hiring manager, will review this job description, make few adjustments, and then later on the same agent will start to kind of try to source ideal profiles and candidates, for back to the hiring manager. All that with more or less autonomy. So that's where the tendencies start to go and evolve. So that means a new set of tools for HR in order to do the work more efficiently and of course to pursue this fight to bring the best people into the organizations. So in terms of tools for HR, that also means a new sets of tools for other functions. And I think the role of HR in 2025 will also be to revisit the organizational design, right? Because as more and more functions will start to get augmented by these agentic frameworks, what would it mean for the roles, right? And I think a lot of effort is going to be put. When we talked earlier on this conversation with the panel about the organizational design, I think the role of HR will be also to revisit the job descriptions to understand what are the tasks and responsibilities that the human will need to have in the organization versus what the agent will be able to deliver, right? How do we monitor the data, the responsibilities, the objectives, and so on? And of course, upskilling, right? The upskilling of the workforce to be able to utilize those tools, right? Because it's going to be completely a new technology. And I think like this will start to accelerate from 2025 and beyond, and more this type of agentic frameworks will get embedded in different functions.
Thanks, Alex. You also wanted to talk about pay equity in a tech-driven world. What are your thoughts there?
Right. So pay transparency is a legislation that is progressively getting enforced in European Union, and as well, I know California has already some legislation in place in which the employers need to advertise when they source applicants what is the salary range for a particular position, and all of that is going to be also mandatory in the coming years. And not only it becomes mandatory, but it's also a demand from the Gen Z, from the new generation that is hitting the workforce, right? The expectations are different. And I think it's very important for the organizations to realize that, okay, now they need to have this data in place, and they need to be ready to make that data publicly available, because if they don't do so, they will get penalized, right? And if this data on the other side is messy, if we are not able to justify the pay gaps that we have between different roles based on seniority, based on gender, right, then we are unlikely to source the talent, right? So a lot of the effort will be also put in place to try to revisit the pay scales in the organization, because the expectation is to make them public. And another important point, Karin, I know sometimes the recruiters or the hiring managers have a tendency to ask a question during the interviews, oh, what is your current pay? Well, in Europe, this question is going to be prohibited and banned to ask, in order to not penalize the job applicants and try to not create further discrimination based on salaries.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I think so. I think that there's 5 or 6 states now that have put in place pay transparency legalities, I would say. And I think there's many more states in the US that are going to be following suit. You mentioned that this all could get really messy. And so I'm opening it up to the group, and I'm pondering if we've had the gender parity gap. It's said that maybe it'll take us 100 years to reach gender parity. And if all the data we have is inequitable, how are we going to get there? If the data is messy. Thoughts? Ooh, crickets.
I think that the messy data won't necessarily be the biggest concern. I think reframing mindsets around how we approach compensation and rewards. Again, if we're going more towards the skill-based system, right? If we're going more towards a system that is based on if people can learn new things and apply what they already know, that compensation piece gets relatively messy relatively quickly. But I think we have to be prepared as HR professionals to hold the line on making our managers understand that we have to pay fairly. We have to, match the market. We cannot necessarily look to be getting bargains anymore because that hurts long term, right? The people who are in those positions. And so I think the messiness of it is probably part of what's going to make it even easier for us to have some of those conversations. But it is just one of those things that continues to, especially in larger organizations, be a talking point of, do we talk about the top of the range? Do we talk about the middle of the range? Do we not talk about the range? Do we let it be a surprise when you get an offer letter? All of those kinds of things. And I think that is something that organizations and managers are really going to have to dig deep to find out what their real values are around the process.
Thanks, Kristen. Just want to acknowledge that Karen and Susan had to pop off. So thank you both, Karen and Susan, for joining the panel today. And I really want to continue with this conversation, but we're going to move on to Geeta and have a conversation about team connectiveness. So Geeta, welcome. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
I would think it's really interesting how we're we are flowing and moving through these trend topics. And team connectedness is an interesting trend. And so I want you to explain a little bit more about what that is, or how do you define it, and how you're working with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I think there's so much innovation. There's so much change that I'm almost, you're starting to see that interest from people to go, okay, can we get back to some of the fundamentals? Because there's some stuff broken at the bottom. And so I think so what, the beautiful thing about AI and a lot of this sophistication that's going on in the HR space is that it's now forcing people to come to terms with their root selves, right? and it's fascinating because now I can't spend 30% of my day doing things that now I can smartly and intelligently source to systems, right, and automation. And so what it's forcing is that whole, I've got to get in front of my personality or in the root of who I am, my emotional intelligence, if you will, to kind of serve my interests. So we're seeing that. In order to be more, my employers are like, in order to be more competitive, in order to help bridge some of that work that's happening with the presence of so many generations in the workforce, how do we teach people to get back to their unit of their emotional intelligence and get aligned with it to drive productivity within themselves and productivities within their organization? So that's what I do. I do a lot of work around. So I'm less in that. I have a space where I do tech work, and some of that stuff is also played out in Humor Edge, which is the business I founded because of some of the therapy that needed to happen from some of the technology, if you will. So, Corianne, you put up that slide. It's a fascinating thing because I think a lot of people, what we're seeing is that our anxiety has really become alchemized at work. Gosh, I don't even want to bring this up, but I will. You'll see the comic I have of everybody just looks at anxiety and everybody's stressed all the time. And that's become a level of acceptance within the workplace. And so if you look at that, it's not necessarily accepted. It shouldn't be accepted. And so that's what we're spending a lot of time doing, is putting together programming curriculum that helps companies address that anxiety. So an example of that would be, you're seeing, I hate to say this, but like death, when the United Healthcare worker was killed, people were sending my condolences and copays. Like I don't know if that's acceptable. I don't know if that by human, definition should be just acceptable, right? We should really kind of look at things like that as kind of an opportunity for us to kind of, let's revisit our emotional intelligence. So, examples of things that we're seeing in the workplace is building up that empathy. We are finding that people, especially because they are very, socially on their social networks, they're looking at their TikTok, they're looking at their social media, and they're becoming very self-absorbed with things that generate and interest them, but they're having a hard time kind of relating to others in the workplace. So empathy and developing those skills is something that we're doing a lot of work around. A lot of executives are starting to look at that and go, how do I build and help my generations across the board establish and build empathy? And not only because it's good for the person and it's good for their mental health, but it's also good for the organization. It's good for product design. It's good for resilience. It's good for efficiencies and processes. It's good for collaboration, which are those things that we will need as units of teams, units of companies to build and develop great things in this world. So that's what a lot of these companies are starting to look at, is just, how do I now take all these things that have been downskilled into the AI world and now upskill my emotional intelligence muscles with my teams? And it's become a very fascinating topic. I see a lot of millennials, I see a lot of people across the board get very jazzed about that, because it's something that hasn't been a muscle that people have been working on as strongly in the corporate space. So that's a little bit about the work at corporate. I say corporate empathy, corporate, even things like humor. Humor can be a vehicle for connectivity. And we are taking these very sophisticated things that are in our paleo-reptilian brain, like empathy and humor, and we are helping people harness it and shape it in a good way. So that's kind of that kind of novel programming that you're seeing at the team connectedness level, that a lot of these C-level executives that I'm working with are saying, like, let's do something different, and let's give some pretty novel curriculum to our to people that come through our organization, so they understand how to use these things. So
what are we ever going to do without TikTok?
A lot, but but a lot, but a little, right? It's kind of one of those things where, it has so many merits, but it has so many pitfalls as well, right? So you're right. That it's a paradox. It's a dichotomy, or it's kind of it's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, there's a big push for AI for good. So AI is meant to humanize us. Yes. And we really have to keep that insight. And so panel, how can we do that? How can we keep AI for good and AI to humanize us in sight? And welcome Mindy and Jessica to the team here.
Yeah, I think it's having a really good, strong harness on your emotional intelligence. It's really fascinating. I think we get so consumed by letting things dictate us, through letting AI dictate. I'm a victim of it myself, but I have to kind of go, I'm in control. You have this thing, all of us do within us, which is instinct, right? And if we truly sometimes listen to that, it'll help us use some of these tools that are coming out better, live better lives. So that's kind of the thesis of, there's good use of social media. I'm not knocking social media, but then there's this whole side of, should I be on social media as much as I am, or am I using it in the right way? I don't know, so causing us to live so much in our heads. Yeah. Sean Wing had actually put out this anxiety, insecurity, imposter syndrome, causing us to live so much in our head, rapidly drains our batteries. Exactly. Right. And one thing that over eons and millennia we've proven is that humans need humans. Right. So, that's something that, and as you can become really inside of the AI, like you can live in a world where, I won't say AI, I'm not even going to say AI, because that's not the real answer. You can live in a world where you are an isolate, but like we need water and oxygen, we need human connectivity. It's just something fundamental that we'll never go away from. So I think as companies become aware of that and cultivate that, and HR becomes a purveyor of that, you will start to see some innovative programs come along that will keep people happy and keep people engaged, that will cross chasm as far as generations. And so that's kind of the work I'm doing. It's a lot about listening to your gut, and then working with the management team to help people use their gut for good.
I like that. Use your gut for good.
Use your gut for good. I've got, yes, trademarking it. So
yeah, like we trademarked microdosing change last year. As Mindy brought that up, that seemed to kind of be the theme across the whole thing. So what is it? Gut for good? Use your gut for good. Gut for good.
2025, the year of following in your instincts and using that for good, you know? So
awesome. Yeah, no, Troy mentioned in the private chat here that, you know, our attention spans are shortening all the time. And I tell my kids all the time, because they say, Mom, why is school so boring? And I said, because you have the attention span of less than a goldfish. And they're like, what? And I said, go tell your teacher that the reason why that you're having problems is because you're not meant to have a long attention span.
Right. But you know, you also can flip that. There's so many ways to look at that, right? And go, is our school system failing us? Do we need to innovate better? You know, I'm not saying it's failing, but I mean, you could even just kind of take a different optic to it, right? And so there's a lot of ways, and because I think there's some part of us that says, well, are we keeping up with what's being generated in any space, the AI, you know? And
so I want to open up a question to the group. If we have shorter and shorter attention spans, how do you build connectedness? If your attention span is less than 8 seconds, how do I actually form a human connection with you? So I think it's not necessarily about, it's acknowledging the fact that our attention spans are less than 8 seconds, but not necessarily letting that be the excuse why we can't do other things. Because I feel like if we're talking about connection and you're calling me back to the office, right, because I have to be connected to my coworkers, how do I do that if my attention span is 4.5 seconds?
So I will say some of that is that empathy work, right? Yeah. Because people are so involved with themselves and so consumed that if you take yourself out of it and bring somebody else into that fold, there is an element of time that kind of gets, what is the word? It gets removed to some degree, right? When you're helping somebody, you're not thinking of your 7 seconds, right? And that's, and when you help somebody and you realize what the pains and the challenges they go through, the work, the life becomes that much more satisfying, and we're less focused on the minutes and what we're getting out of it. And we're more focused on like greater good, you know, and self-satisfaction. I mean, I actually think that as humans, we will never, I don't know, we'll always need that.
Thanks, Geeta. I'm going to turn it over to Marnie now and introduce our next panelist. So
I don't know. That was heavy to move from Geeta. Great. Hey, Troy. Let's move on to the next subject. So Troy Vermillion, definitely excited to be chatting with you again. He's the client executive at Highland, but also an HR or all things tech extraordinaire. So Troy, in 2024's dynamic and competitive environment, like there's been a lot of M&A activity. There's been a lot of emerging HR tech trends. What do you predict will have the greatest impact on the way that we hire, engage, and retain employees in the next year?
There's a lot we could unpack here, but I know I have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to try to focus on what I think are the big things. You're starting to see this, but I think AI-powered personalization is going to be huge. So imagine your HR systems, all of them at some point, learning what each employee needs before they even ask. I know that sounds crazy, but I think we're on the precipice of being able to do that based on all of the data that is going into these systems as we engage with them, and the connectivity of the systems because of the acquisitions that you talked about happening. And so I think from, onboarding to performance reviews to really all of it, I think AI it can be aware of all the content and proactively assist the HR department, the team, to make personalized, communications that don't feel robotic, right? Because the large language systems are getting better. Price Waterhouse Cooper actually did a survey, and it found that 70% of employees believe personalized experiences really increase their engagement. So yeah, I think that's going to be a big one. One we talked about a little bit earlier was the skill-centric, proponent of really everything that organizations are doing. So you mentioned upskilling to really workforce planning. HR tech is actually going to prioritize what people can do over where they actually work. So platforms like Culture Amp, I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. They're looking to turn your data into actual actionable insights, really helping you identify skill gaps and things like that. You asked specifically about what's maybe going on in the community of M&A. There's been more activity in 2024 than you've seen in previous years. And it's not the big players that you're seeing where they're billion-dollar moves. You're seeing a significant uptick in transactions with smaller plays versus like the big swings or the big, billion-dollar blockbusters that you've seen. And so they're being smarter about these strategic acquisitions and less. So think less, axe and more scalpel in the way that they're doing it. And so that's a big part of what I've seen.
I love that. Less axe, more scalpel. I think when
Yeah.
you and I talked earlier, in the year, and we were talking about all things AI, and people were like, okay, well, what tools, should I be using beyond the
Right.
free tools? And, at that point I was like, just take a beat.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a reshuffling in the HR tech industry, so to speak. And so I think you're seeing a lot of that now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious as far as, the tools that are out there as it pertains to HR technology. What are you most excited about as far as what's coming up?
There's so many exciting things happening where you're seeing some of the larger players in the HCM place not just say, okay, well, we have an open API per se that we can connect to the systems that you're already using. Those could be point solutions for all sorts of different things. I'm obviously in the benefit industry, so I see a lot of really great solutions out there that have AI built into them that help with onboarding or communication or just kind of creating things that are very personalized. What I think you're going to see, and what I'm already seeing, is acquisitions of those so that they can just bring those. So the larger players are bringing the smaller players into their products so that they have all those same capabilities across the entire life cycle of an employee. That's very exciting. As much as I love a really good point solution, the problem is the disparity that causes when an individual who already has 50 logins to 50 different things for their own personal needs now has to log into 5 different systems just to manage their payroll and their 401k and all of these systems. And so I think those sorts of consolidations, albeit that might feel scary because you have so many large platforms out there that feel like they could dominate an industry and remove the competitive nature of things. There will always be players, especially with the speed of AI right now and the development that come up and continue to create more competition within the marketplace so that you'll still have the innovation that we need versus just a few large players owning everything. But some of those acquisitions are really going to improve employee experience and the ability of the HR team to offload administrivia, all the tactical stuff. So you can be more strategic, you can be more present. And I think HR professionals today want that. They're not just administrative, people. They want more time, leading from the front, being a part of the conversation, when it comes to AI and deploying that within the organization than they've had in previous decades. And so I'm very excited about where this is going to actually put, I think, more of the HR professionals at the table having the conversations because how imperative it is and the point in history we're at right now.
Administrivia.
Yeah. You can steal that one.
I'm gonna, that's great, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head as far as the way I look at it of employee experience being consistent. you know, and with logins, but then also what is the experience? What is the tone of the environment that you're getting through the use of AI? And I would love to, you know, open it up to the panel, you know, of anyone else seeing some really exciting advancements as it pertains to HR tech and kind of that tapestry of technology that's available to us.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Alex. I know this is your area of expertise. I'm a technologist, but you're doing a lot of it. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I'm very well said, Troy. I think ultimately, as we see, like there is no everything, like the data was segmented in the past, and now we see more and more integrations in the verticals across the suite, like all these from hire to retire journeys. We finally get, like, you know, all the tools working seamlessly together and ultimately accompanying that experience for the employees, right? So exactly as you're saying, eliminating the different point of entry in different tools and different systems, right? Everything becomes part of one larger HR ecosystem, I think, and maybe we'll move towards a more like a super app kind of employee space where everything is going to be integrated, and people analytics will be much more powerful because they will go beyond HR data. They will go and tap into the sales information, you know, it will go and expand into operational time and attendance and so on. So a great evolution around this ecosystem.
I agree.
Alex called it a super app for 2025.
Yeah. I'm really curious, and I'm seeing a lot of starting to see a lot of conversation around 2025 being the year of employee AI enablement. And so these all fit together, all these trends fit together like a puzzle.
I agree with that. So obviously I work here at Highland, and it's not my day to day to just talk technology, but that's what I do with my my clients all day long. We're like, how do we operationally speed this up? How do we streamline it? How do we make it easier on you? Because if it's hard on HR, it's also hard on employees. It just is. It's just systematically, that's going to be the way it is. So if we can make it easy on HR, it makes it easy on them to make it easy on employees, right? And that's just the process. So in my thought is that some of the things that we need around this is really people in the HR space to come in and say, hey, look, I get it that you're solving all of these problems, you're innovating all of these things, but these are my most critical problems because I think there's a disconnect. One example of that would be in the benefits space. Like, hey, the carriers, there's 4 major carriers in the United States. It's Blue Cross, United, Aetna, and Cigna, right? We call them the BUCAs. The biggest problem is that they don't have, say, a super app, right, where they can bring in all the data and do something with it. It's such a painful process for you to set up any sort of system integration with the carriers. And it's one of the most expensive things both employers and employees are having to deal with. And because there's only 4 carriers, they're not moving that fast. They want to keep that private and secret. And so what we need to do is break down those barriers, right, Alex? Like where we have some sort of middleware where we can bring our data that, because it's ours, it should be ours, where we can use it the way that we need to. And we can start to see, instead of just descriptive information about what's going on, prescriptive strategies that actually help us solve real world problems. And that's where I want to see AI go.
Hallelujah to that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, fantastic. You know, amen. I'm going to kick it over to I'm going to kick it over to Mindy. Welcome, Mindy.
Hey, thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'm excited to be talking with Jessica. I love seeing successful heads of people grow into executive roles. And I love that, you know, Jessica right now is at Very, was their head of people, chief people officer, and the past 6 months has moved in the chief operating officer role. I've started to see more of this where we see our chief people officers taking other C-level positions. Jessica, I would love to hear, like, what would, if you had to like distill it down into one, two, or three things, what would those things be that you think came from your expertise as a chief people officer that just made you primed to be Barry's next best COO?
Well, thank you so much, Mindy, and thank you for including me in the conversation. I know I'm not a pure HR person anymore. I do still have HR people in my umbrella. I also have operations, IT, and marketing. And I think one of the things that has long frustrated me, I'm a very entrepreneurial-minded person. And so coming up in the people space, you always hear this, like, get the seat at the table and, what's your HR strategy? And I was like, wait a minute, back up. What is the number one spend of every company on earth? It's payroll. It's people. So why in the world is the number one spend having a separate strategy? Why is it not built in? And having that background and that perspective has allowed me to take on the COO role in a very different way, because I've really been able to look at our business from that perspective of, this is the most expensive thing that we have. How do we really utilize, leverage, and fuel the development of our people? Because that's going to fuel the development and future of our company. And so that's something that I talk a lot about with, anyone that I'm networking with, and I talk to them about that, because they'll say, like, but how did you make that change? And so I always tell them, if you're talking about your people strategy separate from your business strategy, you failed. They're not different. You have an umbrella of your business strategy and your functional lanes that all go into that business strategy, right? So you've got your people strategy, you have your marketing strategy, you have your product strategy. All of those are just lanes within your business strategy, and they all should be married together. I will also say, on the other side of that, being able to live inside and see these other functions has allowed me to understand, I think, Troy, some of the things you were saying, like, what are the friction points? Where is it difficult for the employees? And, you sitting over here in this people world going, why aren't they adopting it? Why is it not being used? And then when you live within the other functions, you stop and you step back and say, I see it now. I get how it doesn't integrate within their functional day-to-day experience. So how do we find the ways to bridge those? So I call my team, everybody who reports up into me, the Synergy Squad, because I want them to talk to each other and work with each other. And so getting to have those areas underneath me and working together and communicating and sounding board and bouncing those ideas off of each other just leads to more robust ideas being rolled out to the organization, instead of just individual functions coming up with an idea and then pushing it out to everyone else.
Oh, it's like hearing music to my heart. I love that. I find so often, like, that for me is like, we even like talking about the culture, and it's separate from the business strategy. It's really, how are you connecting the conversation of culture and that employee experience with the conversation of profitability, of revenue or liquidity, or whatever that conversation is. So often I get pushed back, like, well, but Mindy, how do you, when you're thinking about the people strategy, even if it's tied to the business, it's just so hard to find a direct correlation of how the people strategy is driving an ROI. It's indirect. And I get these often these pushbacks. Jessica, what have you found? What could you be speaking to the HR leaders listening today about, as they move the conversation of the people strategy into connect it with the profitability? What are some of those ways of measuring that ROI, whether it's indirect or direct? What have you seen be successful?
It's a great question. So I was having a conversation with someone who's much earlier on in their HR journey recently. And one of the things that I told her is, the most important thing when you're talking to the most senior leaders is you have to remove emotion from the conversation. I think a lot of times people in HR tend to have very big hearts, and they want to share that, like, emotional component. It's not going to resonate. So we can sit here and we can talk about, is that good? Is that bad? Like, should it change? It is the reality. So I always tell my team there are things that are not right but real, and we have to live in that world. So you have to present information in a way that is clear, logical, and lacking in emotion. So if you want to talk about how ROI is derived from investing in your people, you're going to want to talk about upskilling. You want to create what that looks like. We have very defined metrics that look at each level and what the skills and how they're defined technically, because we're technical, mostly engineers, and behaviorally. And we have that laid out level by level. So you can go through and look and see. And it is undeniable to look and see how that's going to have a direct impact on your business. You can look at tenure. How does your tenure look across teams? When you look at your review, so we do 360 reviews for everyone in the org every year. You look and see who are the top performing managers. You can see that translate into their teams, right? So again, how are those skills? So somebody earlier, I think, said soft skills. I cannot stand that term. I'm so sorry, everybody. Behavioral skills, it is for me, because they're not soft. There's nothing soft about them. So behavioral skills, how does that behavioral skill as a manager, investing in their management journey, how does that lead to better performance, better engagement, longer tenure, increased satisfaction at work? That's going to increase productivity. You can tie all those together, and that's where people analytics has really come forward. I actually think those are the places we can use AI. I love AI. I use it every day. Things like people analytics are an incredible place. We don't need to have people sit down with calculators anymore and figure these out. We can use AI to figure it out, and utilizing your business metrics and making sure you have clean data can really sell to the executive suite. This is why it's important. Leave the emotion at the door, because it's not going to get you there.
Yes.
Yes.
Digital high five, Troy.
Yeah.
There you go.
Kareen, I noticed you went off mute. Was there something you wanted to chime in?
No, I was just, I did what I needed to do when I was off mute, and now I'm back on. So.
Also, just wanted to make sure.
Okay, yeah.
You said some powerful things in there, Jessica. First of all, going back to Synergy Squad, absolutely love that. I might have to start using that. Right but real, also like very good. And I love that it's like taking the emotion out of it to be able to focus on the facts and be seeking to be curious to understand and to dig in there more. Because I think often the presenting emotion often hides some of the actual data or the time to go in and dig in further. So I absolutely love that. And I love how we're tying everything back to AI as well. Is there anything that Jessica kind of resonated with the panel? I'd love to hear. Do we have any, additional viewpoints on this or thoughts?
I think what stuck with me was it's not right, but it's real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things, that's not right, but it's real. And I think that kind of puts into center stage that we can also make those things right, or we can work towards changing them to make it right. So kind of that's what stuck with me.
Yeah, I think traditionally HR was not seen as a department. I know as crazy as that is, but not seen as a department that was traditionally analytical in the way that decisions were made, right? And I think you make some really solid points in the fact that now we have the ability to prove, based on metrics, that what we're doing is having an impact on the bottom line of the organization. And so just understanding it's not right, but it's real, walking in, with some data that says, okay, the reason I want to deploy this, strategy, right, is because we can see a steady uptick in these individuals. Maybe it was a case study that you tried to do for, leadership training, that we saw an uptick in performance because of this small investment, right? And maybe not necessarily saying, hey, we did deploy this strategy across the entire organization, for our first ask. That might be too big of a budget demand, but saying, hey, give me an opportunity with a small budget to do this program, deploy it with a small group of people, and see if this is something worth applying to the rest of the organization based on real data, right? And so I know every COO, CEO, CFO is really going to appreciate if you show up with something tangible like that with an ROI built into it, saying, hey, we make this investment, we get this outcome, let's do it, right? So
absolutely. I think a second part of that, Troy, is also ensuring that you're running and feel comfortable running with agility. I think a lot of times what I've seen historically with people in HR is they're like, if we roll out a program, it has to be equal for everyone and everyone has to have a seat. And it's like, hold on, we can get there, but first let's test and try. Let's use an agile approach here, because that's your opportunity to gain the data to actually be able to show and prove.
Right.
Now we need to get it to more people. But I think so often I've seen so many companies fail to launch something until they can bring it out to everyone because that's the right thing to do. And what happens is it doesn't work out. That it has low adoption. You don't have the metrics to prove that the investment is worth it. And so it never goes anywhere. It falls flat. It becomes that much harder for the next time you want to roll out a program to get the approval, to get the backing to do the thing. So I'd also encourage everyone, think about that. How do you test and try small groups, get the data, prove it? They also can then be your early adopters to share, right? To share with the org. Here's why I loved it. Here's what I learned from it. They can evangelize it to everybody. So leveraging those types of approaches, just like I think we talked about design mindset earlier, using it just like you would design a product. It's the same exact thing, but with your people and with your talent strategy. Be okay. It doesn't have to go to everybody all at once. Be okay taking a stagnated approach to it to get to the best place.
Yeah, one thing that you said there that resonated with me, and I'll let it lie after this, is that you can find champions within the organization. These would be leaders within the organization that see what you're doing and that you're close with, that will look at what you're doing and see the value to that. And those people would be my test cases, right? So making sure that I'm not trying to, deploy this to the manager who doesn't answer emails, but like once a month, right? I'm trying to deploy this to the leader that is engaged with what we're doing, that is excited about some of the changes that we're making, the early adopters to the innovations that we're making. Those sorts of people can be great champions for you to start with, get your use case, and then deploy after.
Yeah, but I always find get one of those people that is going to be cranky about doing it and get them in early. Because if they're cranky, they're going to give you the real deal. If you get your only enthusiast, in that first group, you're only going to get the best positive outlook. I always try to throw somebody in there who I know is going to be the contrarian early, just to see what they have to throw back at me.
That's like that's like pro tip of key stakeholder management, right? Yeah. 100%. I always like to figure out who my naysayers are and get them in early. This is such a good conversation. I could continue on, but we have Lotus with us, and I'm super excited to bring her into the conversation. Lotus is the founder and owner of LB Talent Solutions, also the author of Amazon's #1 new release and best-selling of Joy of HR. Lotus, so excited to have you here. And my question for you is, how can HR best build a workforce that is truly agile and adaptable to change? We've been talking about agility and trying things out and being iterative. What, from your experience, what are some of the best pro tips of how HR could start to build a workforce that is truly agile?
I think that's such a great question, and it's going to be more important than ever to be able to build a workforce that is ready for anything. I think when we look at the past years, if we've learned anything over the last several years, it's that change is not just constant, but it can happen very quickly and very frequently. And we have to be able to adapt to that, right? Look at how much change was thrown at us all at once, huge ones. between COVID, social unrest, mass layoffs. And we've been talking a lot for several years now about upskilling, cross-training, increasing the need for more impactful L&D strategies, but we haven't been doing it very well, because if we did, we would have adapted to some of these changes better, right? And now, on top of all of that, we're introducing VR and AI and machine learning into the fold, and we have to figure out how all of these things are going to come together. But I also think that one of the biggest mistakes that I see and am still seeing is that people are jumping onto these bandwagons of all the new technology and AI without having a strong foundation, and then it flops. So without comprehensive need assessments, I always encourage people that you really have to do a strong needs assessment, because every company, every organization, every population of employees, every team's needs are going to be very, very different. And I can't stress this enough, but nuance matters. And we don't think about that too much. We think we can just copy and paste. We take best practices, which I don't think is a bad thing, but I think too often we just take best practice as what it is and we try to implement it where we are, and it doesn't work. And we wonder why, when all these other companies, right, were successful with it. But you can't just copy and paste. You have to care about the nuances within your organization and really figure out what those needs are. And also desires of our team members, right? And how our culture fits into that. If we do not even have the basics done well, that foundation, these bells and whistles of AR, AI, VR, all of these things, they're only going to become a distraction rather than what they're meant to be, which is a helpful tool that complements your strategy. So what are those basics, right? Like, I think we have mentioned a lot of these today, even in the short time that I've been listening, but it's the change management you were talking about, the change leadership. Do we also have strong workforce planning, which we can get into? And then do we have a culture of agility that's going to allow us to implement these strategies and tools that will help us build that ready workforce that's adaptable and sustainable?
Oh, I love that. And I'm kind of seeing the elements in what you're saying is definitely the capabilities of design thinking. But I think foundationally, even as a next step, because change management can sometimes feel like, okay, well, what is that? How do I even start with change management? But there's so many elements in what everyone's saying and what you just said around just project management. And I see like a real need for our HR leaders to really, if they don't have basic project management, really leaning, like a needs assessment is like project management 101. And so that is even like a next baby step. But you mentioned workforce planning also as another skill set. Lotus, could you talk to us a little bit more about that? And how can someone start to really kind of take that next step in workforce planning? And what does that look like to be done well?
Absolutely. So I think that needs assessment is a huge part of it, but I'm just going to kind of pull up my model here. But when I say workforce planning, we're talking about, are you actually being thoughtful? Because the mistake I see is we jump into implementation so fast, and we forget to take that time to be a little more thoughtful about our processes and our decisions and our strategy. And when we look at workforce planning, it's not just about, oh, like this manager wants this number of headcount. This is what I see so much, right? Like we ask our leaders who don't have that training or that education and what a real workforce plan is, and they're just going off of what they think they need, and they're giving you kind of a random number, really is what it is, based on a few assessments that they're doing on their end, looking at their teams and what they're expected to carry out, and then they're giving you kind of this random number of how many extra headcount they have, right? And that's what we sometimes see as what organizations do as workforce plan. But I would love to encourage people to be more thoughtful about that and really look at your supply and demand. So it's not just a numbers game. Yes, that matters, like how many headcount you actually need, but it's also about look at the talent we have within our companies. We sometimes live in these bubbles, right? Like I am finance and I look at my finance team, or I'm IT and I just look at my IT team. But we live in a world now where people are coming with multiple skill sets. There's a lot more career change that happens. You could have IT people you could have 5 people on your IT team with a really strong marketing background. There's this is where that upskilling and that cross-training piece comes in. You might already have some of this talent and this strength within your organization. And if you don't look at that, you're missing out, right? And you're not optimizing your workforce for these changes, for things like recessions when they happen, instead of doing a mass layoff, right? Like, are you maybe better prepared to redeploy people into different areas of the business that are more necessary at the time because you have all these people with extra skills? So it's really being thoughtful about what is that supply of talent and what is the demand of talent that you're going to need in the next, whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And then what's that gap look like? And that's what you're hiring for. Versus your strategy with the talent that you have is how can we redeploy if we find ourselves in a very tough situation? How can we, or do we have people who may not be ready yet, but we can start training them into new skill sets because we see that demand coming and we think that they have the potential, the capability, and we don't have to hire additional headcount in order to cover that for our needs. So really being more thoughtful about how do we address that gap. And I think the last piece to that is another mistake I see is we enforce and implement these plans and then we don't look at them ever again. And then they fall by the wayside and we don't keep up with it. And then we start to see it fail off. And so continuously monitoring those workforce plans is also a really critical piece.
So I'm going to jump in here because we've got 5 minutes left in the stream. And I know that all the moderators really wanted to get into the last question of the stream. Before we do, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us and for supporting the Progressive HR community. Thank you very much. And thank you to my co-moderators, Marnie, Kristen, and Mindy. Thank you for helping me with this stream. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you to audience. Thank you so much for sharing these last 2 hours with us. 2 hours. Wow, they went by so quickly. And we really do hope that you will join us in January. We'll be talking with Priya Punia from IBM. We're going to be talking about AI enablement, specifically employee AI enablement. So with that, let's go around to everybody, starting with Jessica, and very quickly tell everyone what is your top trend and what do you hope, or what was your takeaway? What was your one takeaway from this conversation, and what do you hope to bring into the new year? Really quickly, Jessica, start with you.
Put me on the spot. I think one of the things that we really need to think about is how we take all of this conversation around AI and automation and really make it so that it is people oriented, because there is a chance for it to be very robotic, but in order for it to really be able to be integrated in the business, we need to find the ways that that we can make it work for our people, and that's going to be unique culture to culture. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how Very can leverage that in 2025.
Thanks, Jessica. Marnie, you're on the spot now.
We're all designers, right? And that's, in today's world of technology and intentionality and needing flexibility in our workforce and the way that we design our experiences for our team, we're in the seat now to become really thoughtful and design a people experience that speaks to a very wide audience.
Thanks, Marnie. Alex, you're on the spot now.
Yeah, I think change management is going to be absolutely critical because we're dealing with different generations, right? And our capacity to learn is not the same from one generation to another. So absolutely, as we bring new tools, new processes in place, we need to make sure that we also adapt to the needs of the workforce in the way how we explain those new processes. So change management, very critical.
Thanks, Alex. Kristen, to you.
I think that the enablement of AI and the personalization of leveraging those tools is going to be incredibly freeing for a lot of HR departments.
Thanks, Kristen. Lotus, to you now.
I was going to say intentionality too, so I love that you said that, Marnie. So I'll go with, being more strategic about our workforce planning and talent optimization and maximization.
Thanks, Lotus. I'm skipping myself. I'm leaving myself to the end. So Mindy, you're on the spot.
For everyone took other things. So my takeaway is really kind of what was underlying all this is with technology and humans, really thinking about that workplace ecosystem and how are we really taking learnings from community builders and bringing that into our workplace and thinking about it as an ecosystem and a community.
Thanks, Mindy. Troy, over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to summarize it with the fact that I think specifically around technology, HR tech is going to enable HR people to become like superheroes. Not that you aren't already, but I think you're going to have such an evolution of your ability to be so much more and reach so many more people in a meaningful way. And I think the key is not just buying the next big thing or buying into the next big idea. You know, we saw a lot of that. Lotus, you did a great job of explaining why that you shouldn't do that. You need some planning before you deploy something or purchase something that you think is going to be the next best thing. But staying focused, staying curious, and remembering that no tech has all the answers, and it's not going to replace you as the strategic leader of people within an organization.
Troy, you kind of took mine, but I was going to say HR being the superhero. So I'll kind of switch it and say to HR around the C-suite. I mean, we're going to dominate this year, I think, with HR being on the forefront of AI enablement. And what I want to take into the new year, I just really think that HR people operations people, you're fabulous. And we really need to and we don't need to do anything. We should be who we are and, hold our hands up and be proud that we're in this profession and that we are so ready to take on 2025. So thank you, everybody. And we will see you in January. And we're going to do this again next year at the end of 2025. So be ready for it.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Happy holidays.